Hello there, it's time for another biology lesson, and today we'll be looking at the introductory part of the topic, the cell. Now the objective of this lesson is to help learners to define the cell, describe the cell, explain the discovery of cell, state the characteristic of cell and the cell theory, and state the types of cells. Now moving along, starting with the subheading, what is a cell? A cell is defined as the structural, functional, and biological unit of all living beings responsible for all of life's processes. All living organisms are made up of cells. They may be made up of a single cell, in that case they will be unicellular, or many cells, multicellular. They provide structure to the body and convert the nutrients taken from the food into energy. Now cells are complex and their components perform various functions in an organism. They are of different shapes and sizes, pretty much like bricks of the building. Our body is made up of cells of different shapes and sizes. Cells are the lowest level of organization in every life form. From organism to organism, the count of cells may vary. Cells comprise several cell organelles that perform specialized functions to carry out life processes. Every organelle has a specific structure. In fact, the hereditary material of the organism is also present in the cell. So you can see this is an example, or these are examples of various cells that you have right here. Now moving along, let's look briefly at the history of the cell. First off, in 1595, Zacharias Janssen created the compound microscope, and by 1655, Robert Hooke was able to identify and coin the term cell when he looked through the microscope, viewing the walls of a cork for the first time. In 1670, we have Anton van Leeuwenhoek, who observed the first living cell in pond water using lenses that he created from his microscope. In 1833, Robert Brown discovered the nucleus in plant cells. In 1838, Matthias Jakob Schleiden proposed that plant tissues are composed of cells. In 1839, Theodor Schwein concludes that not just plant tissue but animal tissue as well are composed of one or more cells. He also states that the cell is the basic unit for all organisms. In 1845, Karl Heinrich Braun restates the second part of the cell theory, proposing that cells are the basic unit of life. In 1855, Rudolf Virchow also proposed the last part of the cell theory, stating that cells only come from other living cells. Now moving along, we'll be looking at the characteristic of cell and the cell theory. Now we have the 5 characteristics of cells here. Number 1, cells are the basic unit of life. Number 2, every living organism from the simplest microorganism to the most complex plant and animal is made up of cells. Number 3, cells are the site of metabolic reactions and the places where genetic material is housed. 4, all cells have at least 3 common features: a cell membrane, cytoplasm, and genetic material, DNA. Now looking at the cell theory proposed by Theodor Schwann, Matthias Schleiden, and Rudolf Virchow shows these 3 basic characteristics. Number 1, all organisms are made up of one or more cells. Number 2, the cell is the basic unit of all living organisms. And number 3, a cell or all cells come from pre-existing cells. Now the cell theory is the fundamental to the study of organisms, heredity, and evolution. Now moving along, we'll be looking at the classification of cells. There are millions of organisms of different designs, shape, and sizes that exist in the living world. Though all are made up of cells, classification of cells are based on the following factors. Number 1, their number. Number 2, their shape. Number 3, their sizes. And finally, their complexity or structure. Now looking at the cell number. The number of cells in different organisms is different. Depending on the number of cells, the organisms are classified as unicellular and multicellular organisms. In other words, unicellular organisms are organisms that are made up of only one cell, while multicellular organisms are made up of more than one cell. Examples of unicellular organisms, we have amoeba and bacteria. They are one-celled organisms. And multicellular organisms, you have plants. Examples, plants which are made up of more than one cell, and a deer, which is an animal made up of more than one cell. Now we're going to be looking at the classification of cells based on size and shape of cell. The shape and size vary from cell to cell, consistent with their functions and composition. For example, a neuron or a nerve cell is long and branched, meant for the transmission of signals throughout our body, while muscle fiber is little and spindle-shaped, which helps in movement. Now, this is an example of a nerve cell or a neuron. You can see it's long and branched, while the muscle cell or fiber is little and spindle-shaped, which helps in movement. We have various types of cells. So we have the sperm cell, egg cell, root hair cell, the epithelial cell, white blood cell, red blood cells. We have bacteria, we have algae, pollen grains. These are different types of cells based on shape and size, and they carry out various functions in not only the body but also other cells like bacteria outside the body as well. Now I'm going to look at the classification of cells based on cell complexity or structure. On the basis of complexity or structure, cells are of two types. We have the prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell. Now, the word prokaryotic, pro meaning primitive and karyon meaning nucleus, shows that the nucleus of the bacterial cell is not well organized, or a prokaryotic cell is not well organized like the cells of multicellular organisms. The cells have nuclear material but no nuclear membrane. In other words, a prokaryotic cell doesn't have a true or clear nucleus. The organisms with these kinds of cells are called prokaryotes. Examples of prokaryotes are bacteria and blue-green algae. And in the case of eukaryotic cell, where we have the eu, which means true, and karyon, which means nucleus. In these types of cell, these cells have well-developed nucleus and are more complex than prokaryotic cell. All organisms other than prokaryotic cell are eukaryotic cell. As you can see here, in an eukaryotic cell, it has a proper nucleus, which has nucleolus, and a nuclear membrane, which shows nucleus, and other organelles like ribosomes, mitochondria, and so on. But in a prokaryotic cell, a prokaryotic cell doesn't have a true nucleus. You have its genetic material scattered in the cytoplasm. So it doesn't have other membrane-bound organelles except ribosomes. Now moving along, we'll be looking at the differences between an eukaryotic and prokaryotic cell. So the differences will be based on certain characteristics. For instance, definition. An eukaryotic cell is any cell that contains a clearly defined nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. But a prokaryotic cell is any unicellular organism that does not contain a membrane-bound nucleus or organelles. We have differences in examples. Eukaryotic cells, examples are animals, plants, fungi, and protist cells, whereas prokaryotic cells are bacteria and archaea. The nucleus in eukaryotic cells are present, that means they are membrane bound, while they are absent in prokaryotic cell. Now in eukaryotic cell, their cell size are large, from 10 to 100 micrometers, while in prokaryotic cells are small in size. They are less than 5 micrometers. DNA replication in eukaryotic cell is highly regulated with selective origins and sequences, whereas in prokaryotic cell it regulates the entire genome at once. The organism type: in eukaryotic cell they are usually multicellular. Prokaryotic cells are usually found in unicellular organisms. The chromosomes of eukaryotic cell are more than one, and prokaryotic cell are just single loop of DNA plasmids. Ribosomes in eukaryotic cells are large, and ribosomes in prokaryotic cells are small, and it goes on and on like that. Organelles are present, organelles are absent, and plasma membrane is present in eukaryotic cell, and they are present in prokaryotic cell. Cytoplasm present in eukaryotic cell, present also in prokaryotic cell. So these are the differences between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. Now moving along, we are going to finally look at the function of a cell. The main functions of the cell are as follows. They are the basic unit of life. They are for protection and support. Cells also, they move, they communicate. Cell carries out metabolism and energy release, and also cells also helps in inheritance. Now this brings us to the end of our lesson, cell introduction. Let's take a quick look at the summary. A cell is defined as the structural function and a biological unit of all living beings, responsible for all of life's processes. All cells have three basic components: the cell membrane, cytoplasm, and genetic material. Cell theory was proposed by German scientists Theodor Schwann, Matthias Schleiden, and Rudolf Virchow. Classification of cells are based on the following factors: their number, shape and size, complexity or structure. A cell carries out all of life's processes. Now before we go, I want you to pause this video and attempt the question in this assessment to know how much of the lesson that you have imbibed. And also don't forget to like, share and subscribe this video, and I will see you again in the next lesson. Bye bye.